Hi, Miss Reader. It is Zachary Picard from your AP US History course. This is the video that I'm making for my final project as part of the presentation for my final project in the AP US History course. I'm doing a video because I had considered doing a voiceover or a video with a voiceover on top of the slides that I made for you. As part of my presentation. However, I could not figure out how to do that on my Mac and still have it transfer over as a file that you could use on your PC and load. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you this video, and then I'm going to send you the slides. I'm going to use the slides that I prepared, and I'm going to read off of the slides and use them as my bullet points and continue as a normal presentation would, and then send you the slides so that way you can follow along with the slides as I'm making the presentation for you. Alright, let's get started. So the subject that I chose to do was changes in American culture and politics. The subcategory of the choice that I made here, the changes in American culture and politics, was two major issues that we see today and are discussed in history throughout America, mainly in the 18th and 19th century, but I believe that that works well with the project description, as it will describe, the history in which was trying to be conveyed, and then also using modern politics as well to ensure that I can incorporate both. Alright, so the first two things that I want to cover is the political parties. There are two political parties that I'm observing here in respects to the two different topics that I'm covering as part of a subcategory for the project, is conservatives and liberals, or liberalism. These two are different political parties that have been kind of pitted against each other with different opinions as far as where the country should head politically for at least since the 18th and 19th century. The first group we are going to cover is the conservatives. Conservatives are a political party that believe in the laws that the country were founded on, the political adjustments to the country, and the different laws that were induced in the country, way of doing things, rules, that the country had originally formatted because they believe that those function well with the country. They believe in the old-fashioned style of ethics, morality, and how that still applies to the environment and culture today. Conservatives are often religious, however that's not always the case. You will find conservatives that aren't religious, however it is often found that people who are conservatives are also religious. The reason for this being is because many of the conservative opinions base in different religious cultures that are against that, find the things that the liberals are fighting for to be immoral and unethical or just wrong in their opinion. Conservatives fight to keep the country the way it was formed on the original laws and forms that it was made in, and that's with various different topics. And the conservatives, of course, being the opposing side of the liberals, do not believe in the new age of thinking that liberals tend to use. The second party is obviously liberalists, or liberalism, depending on how you would like to take that. I included a picture of Obama here because he is a liberalist president. He believes in liberalist values and liberalism. Liberalism is a group that is trying to use new forms of politics, new laws, new restrictions, and enforce new equality movements. The liberals are often not religious. They're often atheists or just non-religious in general. That's not always the case, again, because some are religious. They just choose to keep their political and religious values separate, or their religious values do not actually affect any of the issues that they are fighting for. Liberalists often fight for equal rights, new laws, alternative ways to run the country, and new political strategies as to handle the modern day issues. Speaking of modern day issues, the two major arguments that we will be discussing between the two political parties are abortion and cannabis legalization. I chose these two because both of these issues have been around for over 100 years, and they have been vigorously fought over between the United States government, conservatives, and liberalists. The first topic we're going to cover is abortion. Abortion is I forgot the term that I was going to use. It is the termination of an unborn child or a fetus. There are a couple different methods to this, and we will discuss that in just a moment. However, there are a couple of reasons that people believe abortion is correct, and there are a couple of medical justifications for the laws that are put into place, which of course we will discuss in just a moment on the later slides. However, the reason for abortion, there is a couple. Endangerment of the mother or the pregnant woman. This can just stand from anything to, it could injure the mother, it could have negative effects on the mother, it could cause the mother death or serious injury. And of course that's very bad, and oftentimes that's the reason that the state is legal, which of course, again, we'll get to in just a moment. Second reason that I put down here is the mother is too young. Oftentimes you will see a girl who is raped, given a date rape drug, or was forced into a situation where she became pregnant, and she is too young to give birth to the child because her hormones have not fully developed and have not had the ability to form properly. Which brings us to our third reason, which is kind of a mold between the second and third reason. The mother is raped, forced into pregnancy, given a date rape drug, or was put into a different situation that forced pregnancy. This is a common reason for abortion, and oftentimes it is one of the main reasons that people will get abortions. The fourth reason that I'm going to present is the child, when born, would be put into an unstable environment. This can be anything from just living in a bad neighborhood, not having a proper education, and it's a combination of these. It's not one thing individually. Just the obvious inability to take care of the child once it's born without the ability or wish to put it up for adoption. This is a good portion of the cases, however not as large as some of the others. And this is kind of a controversial topic, as this is not always considered a proper reason to get an abortion as far as legal reasons and political reasons. The next is kind of a mold of the fourth, and so it's a mold of fourth and fifth, is the unstable financial situation. If you can prove that the mother does not, and the mother or the father or whoever is going to be dependent for the child, does not have the ability to support the child financially. Therefore, even if they are willing to have the child, they don't have the ability to ensure that the child has a successful life. The last reason I put is a long history of substance abuse. This can be anything from drugs to alcohol, proven arrest records that prove this, or just a simple medical test that says the child may not have the ability to even get through the pregnancy because of the mother's addiction to substance. Alright, so there are a couple different ways to have an abortion where it is legal. The first way is surgical. This can be two different methods of surgical, or if you have your a C-section type procedure where the stomach is opened up to the uterus, and the surgical professional has the opportunity to remove the fetus directly. It is also there's a certain technology where a suction type device in a medical standard is put into the uterus that will allow the fetus, if it is small enough and young enough, to simply be sucked out and removed that way. The second method is through medicine or medical matters, which is the two most common medicines given for an abortion, forced abortion, would be, and I apologize if I say this wrong, I couldn't find a pronunciation among the internet, and it's just kind of a medical term I'm not used to saying, mifepristone and prostaglandin. I'm quite certain I said those wrong, but I had tried for about 10 minutes before I made this recording to make it sound better than that and could not come to a common conclusion, so I apologize if I said those wrong. But those are the two most common drugs that are used in a medical situation where you wish to have the fetus aborted. For the first operation, the surgical, whichever method that you go with that, it is often seen in the late first trimester or the early second trimester for the removal of the fetus. Oftentimes the medical or medicine that is used within the early first trimester or mid first trimester, just because the medicine cannot always work in later trimesters and has been proven through trials that it is not nearly as effective in later usage. Alright, and now we start the abortion history. The start of abortion in America, the real start of more common medical abortion was the 1820s. And it was that point in which the American society had decided that it was, and the American government had decided that it was illegal to give medicine that would terminate, the pregnancy. This, of course, is an issue that was controversial because at that point in the 1820s, it was considered more immoral than you would see today if a woman got pregnant out of wedlock. It was just considered, it was a more conservative time, and so for a woman to be pregnant out of wedlock or to be poor and not have the opportunity to support her family was more common. In the 1860s, it progressed to being a felony in almost every state to perform an illegal abortion. And then there was, following that, a case that was the Roe versus Wade case that said you could not use drastic restrictions on early pregnancy for a good cause of termination. This case received much controversy. It was a case that was tried to say that with a justifiable reason you could get an abortion. And this would, this of course caused some controversial issues because if the case won, it means that early pregnancies would not be as restricted because the law would change. However, when the case was won and early pregnancies did have less restrictions on them, what was found is that the for later portions of the pregnancy, 24 weeks and out, it was much more restricted, and it had many more restrictions on it that ensured that it was only in dire of circumstances that you could get an abortion. All right, I'll just get my slides working here. Just 1 second. Sorry for the delay. All right. On to the next slide. Alright, so the main history of abortion, there's a little bit more. We're continuing from the history of abortion in the previous slide. The 1860s to 1900s was where you saw much more control. Obviously in the 1820s to 1860s there were restrictions put on pregnancies as mentioned in the previous slide. However, the 1860s to the 1900s was where we saw more common use of abortion, so the American government put more restrictions on abortion. The big first major movement to legalize abortion was in 1960. Colorado was the first state to legalize abortion under the condition of rape, incest, date rape, drug usage, or would damage the mother in the process of the pregnancy and then childbirth. Following Colorado, there were laws passed in North Carolina, California, and Oregon that also legalized the ability to have an abortion within a certain time period, which was 24 weeks or before, to ensure that if you had been raped, used date rape, drug usage, damage the mother or infant, that would allow you to have an abortion, and you would not be have to be forced to carry out the pregnancy. In 1970, which was another pivotal moment for abortion in America, Hawaii was the first state to legalize the request of the mother to have an abortion. This means there did not have to be risk of the mother, there did not have to be rape or incest, date rape, drug, or anything like that. If the mother wanted to get an abortion before 24 weeks of time of having the child being pregnant, then you could justifiably ask by request of the mother, if of age, which is 18 years of age or older, could request the child be terminated or the fetus be terminated. Continuing on in the history, this is going to date back a little bit further. To start at more of the closer start, just look at some of the ways in which it progressed from that point. We put that slide there to show you the most recent changes in the history, and now we're going to date back a little bit further to the 17th century. This was the first point in the 17th century. It was about mid-17th century that they started making more advances in abortion and safe methods to abort a child without risk to the mother. Previously, before this point, there were methods of aborting a child. Actually, abortion dates back almost to before Christ period of time, which is obviously BCE now, considered in official scholastic environments. But there were abortion methods by giving them drugs and forced abortions through physical trauma in previous years. However, come the 17th century, the methods of abortion were much safer. During the 17th and 18th century, the practice was not widespread, though. While there was serious advances in the safety and ability to ensure a safe abortion, much more than the previous years and previous centuries, it was not a huge movement because of the fact that it was a very conservative time during the 17th and 18th century where people still considered pregnancy out of wedlock to be a very immoral and very wrong thing to have happen. Therefore, medical doctors still saw it as an incredibly inappropriate thing, because if you were receiving an abortion, it meant that you had sexual intercourse outside of your wedding most of the time. Obviously, this was not all of the case, otherwise it would have been a much more restricted process or even more legal than it is now, but it was the case for much conservatism. In the 19th century, it was banned from the United States, which was where it became a much more popular usage. While during the 17th and 18th century, you saw that it was used, it was not a very popular process because, again, they were conservative. In the 19th century, we saw a movement from conservatism to more liberalism. You saw many more of the different rights of people being expressed and wanted to be changed in America as we move towards a liberalist environment. It was in the 19th century made legal it was late 19th century in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, made legal in 30 states under the circumstances of rape, incest, or date rape, drug pregnancy, made legal to have an abortion. Going back to the Roe v. Wade case in 1973, there were restrictions that were made upon that that concluded to the 30 states receiving abortion law and ability. New York in the 1900s repealed its law that was made in the 1830s that was against abortion. This was one of the first states to do so, allowing for anyone to get an abortion up to 24 weeks of pregnancy, which is really where the restriction for amount of weeks was certified. To have that ability, it was 24 weeks before, because by medical terms it was still a fetus and not yet considered a child as far as ethical standards. The New York law that was passed was followed by Alaska and Washington. While Washington did have some dispute in a case that caused for some controversy, it was covered and was worked through to ensure that Washington, D.C. did have the ability to create a similar law to have abortion be a legal operation. All right, let's see. While many of the states have, in fact, gone to legalize it for certain reasons, there are still 4 states that consider it illegal. You cannot, for any reason, get an abortion in 4 different states in America. Like mentioned earlier, there are 30 states that it was illegal to do just by request. There is 1 state that allows abortion in just case of rape. So if a woman is raped, then she has an ability in that state to receive an abortion. There are 2 states that allow abortion specifically just for the case of the woman's health being in danger. So if it will affect her during the pregnancy, during birth, or following by having the child, then those 2 states can be used as a state to get an abortion. 30 states are fully illegal, just for no reason can you get an abortion there. And there are 13 states that allow abortion in case of rape, incest, date rape, drugs, or endangers of the mother health altogether. And that is the most modern update as far as the legalization of abortion. The conservatives believe that abortion is wrong. This is the conservatives' opinion on abortion, and then we will compare it to the liberalists. Conservatives believe that the fetus is a child, therefore the act of destroying a fetus, even in the earliest weeks of pregnancy, is murder. They believe that the child has a full life to live and an option to live that life, but when terminated, you're taking that choice away. The fight against the liberals, the argument that they used is you're always fighting for new abilities to have, free choice and free will to make decisions on your own, but of course a fetus does not have the ability to make that argument to live or die because it is, of course, a fetus and cannot communicate. Therefore, it is unfair and murder to kill an unborn child. Conservatives believe that if there are going to be abortions, then abortions should receive more restriction. While there is a good amount of restrictions on it now, in the conservatives believe that there should be more restrictions. Mostly they're referring to the states that you can have the ability to get an abortion with just by request. For instance, Hawaii is one of the states that was mentioned earlier that you can have an abortion just by request of the mother with the proper age. They, of course, believe that this is wrong. Conservatives do consider the rape, incest, date rape, drug, or risks to health as a reasonable argument towards having an abortion, but they do not believe it to be an airtight environment because oftentimes, some of the cases will not be proven. It is questionable as to whether those specific circumstances are justifiable based on that specific person's justification for having it. The conservatives, however, one of the options that people give for receiving a abortion is an unstable environment. This can consist of drug use, alcohol abuse, an inability to have the proper finances, or an unstable environment that is just unable to raise a child in because of irresponsibility or the inability to take care of the child is an unreasonable excuse. They believe that to be a non-justifiable argument, as the option for adoption is available. You can put the child up for adoption and give that child the ability to have the choice to live its life versus just terminating the child. And again, of course, they believe that the murder of a fetus is the murder of a child, or the removal of a fetus is the murder of a child. Therefore, if you have the option for abortion and it's not going to affect your health, it's not going to affect the health of the baby should be born to ensure that it has a chance at life. Now, liberals also have an opinion, and of course it is different from the conservatives because they believe in a new age of choice. The liberals believe that it is the mother's choice as it is the mother's responsibility after the child is born and their mother's responsibility to take care of the child during the pregnancy, that she should have the full unwarranted opinion and ability to make the choice for herself. The liberals believe that the procedure should be left entirely up to the patient and not that of the ethical opinion of religious groups and conservatives. They do not consider the fetus to be a child before a certain point. They consider it to just be a fetus. Unborn child is not something, because they oftentimes, as I mentioned earlier, are not religious, so they do not believe in the soul or not sure there's a good way to put this. The specific energy of the child has not entered yet. Therefore, it is not yet a child until it is born upon the moment of birth. So, the liberals believe that until birth, the child is not actually a child, and they have been arguing up to this day even for when a child is technically considered a child and no longer a fetus. So they don't consider it murder to take a fetus and remove it through medical forms, because it is not technically a child, it is just a fetus. Liberals believe that it is a good way to prevent child abuse or lack of an unwanted child. This is just to say that if the family, for instance, if a mother has already had a child and the child goes through significant child abuse because she did not want the child and the procedure was not available at the time to abort the child, then having that procedure is a good way to ensure that another child does not have to go through child abuse. Another justification for the liberals' argument is that it can save women's lives and keep children out of harmful situations, as in unstable environments, the ability to go through a pregnancy with drug abuse, and the woman's life. Oftentimes, at least a decent amount of the time, women will have the procedure done to ensure that they have good, full health, to ensure that they do not have to experience any issues with the pregnancy that may cause them to have unwanted results or even death. Continuing with the liberalist opinion on abortion, liberals believe that it can prevent some negative side effects, as in unplanned pregnancy, of rape or other forms of forced pregnancy. Obviously, there are methods of preventing rape, but liberalists believe that once it has happened, this is a good way to ensure that someone who is not prepared mentally, physically, or financially to take care of a child have an option to ensure that they can get rid of that child without having to go through the labor of carrying the child for 9 months. Because while oftentimes a woman does have an opportunity to have a pregnancy, sometimes in the modern environment where a woman is in a professional position, she cannot have a child because it does not work for her job. It is illegal to have a child, being pregnant with a child, because it can impede your work performance in certain workplaces, and they believe that this is a good way to prevent women from having to create sacrifices based on a decision they obviously did not make, as far as because they obviously were raped or given other forms of forced pregnancy. And because there are good and safe ways to perform abortions, liberalists believe that it should be a fair option for anyone who wishes to have an abortion, because unlike in previous years, The options for abortion now are very, very simple and safe, which can prevent the mother from having any issues, while also ensuring that a safe environment and procedure is taken care of. The next topic we are going to, that's going to conclude my abortion topic, I guess I should have mentioned, that's the two different arguments, excuse me, the fight for abortion still goes on today. There are still cases and still modern arguments that even have happened within the previous months of whether the legalization in other states or the changing of restrictions should be applied to other states as far as the abortion law. It will continue to be argued over and continue to be fought over by the two different groups and the United States of America and their government. And will until probably many, many years from now. The next controversial topic between conservatives and liberalism is the legalization of cannabis, or as more commonly known, marijuana, weed, or pot. This is an incredibly controversial argument, as there are obviously many different views on the legalization of cannabis. Cannabis, or marijuana, is a recreational drug that can create a high sensation for recreational users. It can also be used in a medical format. This would be the argument, or one of the main pieces of the argument for the legalization of cannabis, because oftentimes cannabis will be seen in the public as a criminal use or a recreational use, as a drug, as you would see as cocaine or methamphetamines and things like that, whereas people will often try and use it for medical purposes. This is not always the case, and we will discuss that in a later slide. The cannabis is a weed plant that can be, it has certain chemicals in it, THC, that is used to create different medical purposes, and obviously for the recreational use caused to create a mental high by altering the chemicals in your body, therefore altering your state of mind. And the different names commonly used for cannabis are weed, pot, and marijuana. Those are the non-technical terms. Obviously, marijuana is a medical term for it. A scientific term for cannabis. However, the other two, weed and pot, are obviously not medical terms, but it is a common term for it. Now we are going to start on the history of the legalization of cannabis. The first real restriction in the United States and Europe for cannabis was in 1619. Before this period, marijuana in general had been obviously discovered and used, but it was not as serious as a drug, and it was also not considered a poison or a drug beforehand. Jumping forward many, many years, the first major increase on restrictions since 1619 has been in 1906. And onward, it was labeled a poison, which we'll talk about that in a later slide. Legal restrictions became much more severe following the first major increment, which was in 1906 in the 1920s. By the 1930s, cannabis had become a regulated illegal drug in every state of the United States of America. Moving on with the next portion of the history of the legalization of cannabis. In 1934, the Uniform State Narcotic Drug Act was made to restrict the use of cannabis in 35 states of the United States of America. With the cannabis already being labeled an illegal drug, this was just a further measure to ensure that cannabis was an illegal material. Now, the first major increment that you saw in the repeal or the taking away of the restrictions of cannabis was in the 1970s. The 1970s started local restrictions to be changed. The federal legalization, while it has changed different services and different bureaus for people who follow and protect against the spread of the illegal use of cannabis, through the federal government has changed in the different organizations that they have formed to use, the law has not changed. The federal government to this day considers cannabis to be an illegal drug. The first major use for legalized local cannabis was used in 1990s for medical purposes. This is not recreational use, it was used to treat medical conditions. The first state that actually legalized the use of cannabis and owning cannabis is Colorado, and that happened on May the 20th of 2013. Very, very recently. Of course, as I mentioned previously, the federal law to this day conflicts with each of the states that the local law states legal cannabis. Federal law continues to restrict cannabis to an illegal drug. Excuse me. Sorry about that. The first, one of the major increments that you saw for, and I'm going to be discussing the different uses from the federal government and the fights between the federal government and local government over the use of medical marijuana. The first one that we saw that was a major event in the news and in history was 1937. The Marijuana Tax Act was formed, so that way local states that had the legal use of it could tax it upon sale. This is, of course, a controversial topic that is even discussed today, as the legalization of marijuana has continued to be fought for. People continue to ask if it is, of course, legalized in the entire country, should we have a distribution system that ensures that the government gets a tax on it? And of course, I will go into that further when we talk about the different conservative and liberal views. But for now, let's concentrate on the history of the legalization of cannabis, the major events of such. The Federal Bureau of Narcotics was formed to regulate the illegal drug use and possession of cannabis in the 1930s. The 1930s was a common time leading up into the modern-day 21st century and leading into what will soon be the 22nd century of America, to ensure that the cannabis was restricted. While certain local states are legalized, the federal government still considers it an illegal drug. Therefore, the effort to get rid of the illegal drug cannabis throughout the country is still fought for, and the Federal Bureau of Narcotics was first formed to ensure that they had a higher chance and a larger ability to restrict that more properly. The major events kicking off from there was the Controlled Substance Act of 1970, which classified cannabis as a drug with a high potential for abuse and was not safe for medical use. This is still in law as a federal law for the country that is yet to be changed. The issue with this for many states that have this legalized is the fact that the substance is illegal based on the federal government and is considered high potential for illegal, unsafe, poisonous abuse. This, of course, is incontroversial to the states that have it legal, use it for medical purposes. Of course, this is completely controversial with the current law by the federal government and the Controlled Substance Act of 1970, which specifically states that the drug cannot be safely used for medical use. The first position that it was stated as a poison was the strengthening of poison law in 1906 to 1923, was when it was becoming illegal and considered a specific poison. A couple of the other majoring events, the International Opium Conference in 1925 was a conference against the use of marijuana in a legal or illegal form. The 1936 Geneva Trafficking Convention was a convention that discussed the issue of trafficking marijuana through the states that were legal and illegal, whether that should be more regulated in those states and in those borders for federal use, because of course the federal government still believes it to be and has a specific law that says it is illegal, whereas the local states do not have the same law. So whether that was something that they should tackle, it did not change any of the different restrictions, but it was a conference in which people came together and discussed those issues. Another major event that happened was the mandatory sentencing of 1952 and 1956, making the first possession of substantial amount of cannabis, this is an ounce or more, over an ounce, I should say, is 2 to 10 years sentencing with a fine of $20,000. This, of course, was more commonly seen in larger increments of cannabis, such as someone who is moving very large amounts of cannabis and not small amounts of cannabis as a basic amount, as you would see as for possession charge versus a distribution charge. This, of course, was repealed in the 1970s with new laws. The reorganization was a big thing that happened between 1968 and 1973. In 1968, the first reorganization was the United States Treasury, the Bureau of Narcotics, and the United States Department were combined to ensure that they could make a more efficient bureau to restrict cannabis spread and sell. It was made into the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. However, Reagan's later look into this in 1973 was combined. They looked and said, well, this would be more efficiently run if we combined the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs and the Office of Drug Abuse Law Enforcement to create the Drug Enforcement Administration. This was the combination of the two because medical marijuana and marijuana is considered to be the most commonly used drug in the United States because it is so easily accessible. Therefore, combining the ability of the two that was concentrating on narcotics, more commonly seen to concentrate on medical marijuana, and the Office of Drug Abuse Law Enforcement was a more efficient way to ensure that they had an administration that could cover them federally. In January of 1976, the California repealed prohibition of weed, which is the taking off the restriction of weed to ensure that medical marijuana could be used, was restricted down to not the full legal use of medical marijuana, but taken down to just a misdemeanor. For less than an ounce of the maximum penalty was a $100 fine, which is a little less in some states than a speeding ticket. A $100 fine was just for less than an ounce. It couldn't be an ounce or more. For an ounce or more, it was seen as a misdemeanor still, but the maximum penalty would be a $500 fine and 6 months in jail. This was done in an effort to cut the budgeting for California restrictions on cannabis, which took their budget down actually by 74%, saving them a drastic amount of money. In 1984 and 1986, a mandatory sentencing was made through federal government sentencing. The three-strike rule, which was put into place, which said that each strike that you got based upon a three-strike rule would increase the amount of time that it would be considered legal and justifiable to lock up restrictive and in respects to large drug dealers in the federal government. Now, one of the biggest cases of the medical marijuana was the big case of the federal United States government versus the California Medical Marijuana Distributor, which was the case where the federal government had actually seized and took much of the medical marijuana that was being used in the government after the cannabis was legalized in 1996 that was considered legal in California but illegal by the consideration of, obviously, the federal government. The federal government won, and this was one of the bigger upsets for the medical marijuana legalization for people who wish to see it legal. And still to this day, even after that case and further cases, it is still considered illegal by the federal government to have possession, distribute, or use the medical marijuana, or recreational marijuana in any form. Now, the different uses for cannabis seen by medical professionals, which has been tested, but not given a full scientific trial as some other things have, which is one of the reasons that, the conservatives make the argument for, but we'll get to that in a second. Some of the medical opportunities that people see in different states for the use of cannabis is pain relief, glaucoma, spasticity in multiple sclerosis, Alzheimer's, breast cancer, HIV and AIDS, brain cancer, optimized dependency, ALS symptoms, Crohn's disease, and diabetes. It has been proven to work in the use of medical marijuana in California and Colorado to see as it has been prescribed with a medical marijuana card for legal use. It has actually seen to be used for this most commonly, but also in other forms of medical usage as well that have not been fully tested. Now, we're going to go over the conservative opinion of medical marijuana. Medical marijuana is considered by conservatives to be a negative. It was considered a drug and a poison for the federal government and is still yet to this day considered to be a federal drug and a poison by the government. Therefore, they believe that if the federal government believes that it is a substance that should not and cannot be used in medical form, it should not be used in medical form. The conservative political party argues that there has not been any full scientific studies to justify the use of medical marijuana, saying that it is an actual and shown, proven case of having the ability to use medical marijuana in a justifiable case. They also argue that the law in local should connect and be the same as federal. Therefore, being as how the federal government has not budged on the fact that it is not a medical use and cannot be used for medical use, it should not be a medical used product. I also saw states with medical marijuana use did not have incredibly strong restrictions. There were some restrictions, and the restrictions believed by liberalism is a great amount of restrictions. It is not anything that needs to be more, but for conservatives, they believe that if it is absolutely going to be used as medical marijuana, there should be further restrictions and further tests with scientific proof that it does work for it to be justified. The legalization of different states such as Colorado and California have encouraged recreational use and distribution, because if you have a medical marijuana card, which in the conservatives' opinion, if you can get a doctor to sign off on that, is very simple to get, then you have the ability to gain access to recreational marijuana. And if you do not have a serious issue, such as if you were to say pain relief and use medical marijuana, then you could get it and use it as a recreational use, and allows for a recreational use instead of the medical format in which it was presented. Now, liberals' view on the legalization of cannabis, it is that it has great medical potential and medical purpose. The things that I listed off are things that have been proven through small scientific studies to work in most cases through medical uses of marijuana, which can be anything from a vapor to put into food and various different methods. They believe that this is an incredible advancement and that any form of medical usage for a product such as cannabis should be looked into and verified. If it works, should be justified and used. They also believe that if the legalization of medical marijuana were to happen, it would actually present an opportunity for the federal government to cut down billions of dollars. We spend over $10 billion a year, preventing medical marijuana around the country and marijuana as an illegal drug use because we don't consider it to be a justifiable drug. Therefore, if we were to cut down on this and make it a legalized product, then it would be just restricting it in the specific form of non-medical usage. We could cut down to just $1 million budget cut, $1 million usage for the government to restrict the access to it versus $1 billion. And that concludes my project. I hope it is exactly what you were looking for, and I hope it turned out well. Again, email me or put a comment on the project if there is any problems whatsoever. I cited on the final slide the usage of my information and the sites that I use to gain that information. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the year, and I do appreciate your patience with me and hope that this project is to your satisfaction.